I never thought a wooden ramp could cause so much chaos. We live in a quiet suburb outside Raleigh, the kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and more HOA rules than common sense. When we bought our home 5 years ago, I barely skimmed the rule book. Honestly, it felt like a formality. We just wanted a safe place for our son, Dylan. Dylan is 9 now. He's had cerebral palsy since birth, smart as a whip, obsessed with dinosaurs, and probably the most determined kid you'll ever meet. Last year, after a rough surgery, his doctors said it was time to switch permanently to a wheelchair. That changed everything. Our front steps suddenly became a daily obstacle. Carrying Dylan up and down wasn't sustainable, not for him and not for our backs. So I did what any parent would do. I hired a local contractor, pulled the city permit, and had a modest wooden ramp built off our front porch. Nothing flashy, just safe. 2 weeks after it went up, a letter arrived. It was taped, literally taped, to the handrail of the ramp, red font, official HOA letterhead. I remember the bolded words burned into my brain. Your exterior modification is in direct violation of the HOA's architectural standards. You are hereby ordered to remove the unauthorized structure within 10 days or face a $100 per day fine. I blinked at the paper like it was a joke, a prank, maybe. Then I read it again. Nope, real as rain. That night, I sent an email to the HOA asking for clarification. I even attached Dylan's medical documents, the permit, everything. I explained, respectfully, that the ramp wasn't just legal, it was essential. No response. 3 days later, I got another notice. This one was certified mail. It said the HOA board had voted and denied the ramp appeal. Apparently, it didn't conform to the visual integrity of the neighborhood. Visual integrity. We're talking about a 4-foot-wide wooden ramp with safety rails, not a neon pink disco ball. I looked out the window at it again. It blended in with our porch. Honestly, it looked cleaner than half the vinyl siding on this street. That night, I took Dylan for a walk in his chair and tried not to cry. He looked up at me and said, "Did I do something wrong?" That broke me. I called the HOA president the next day. Her name was Linda Wexler. Picture every overzealous neighborhood watchdog stereotype rolled into one. Her voicemail was exactly what you'd expect. You've reached Linda Wexler, HOA president and community liaison. Leave a detailed message. I left one, a calm one. I asked for a meeting. She never called back. Instead, 2 men from the HOA's compliance committee showed up at my door 3 days later. One of them was holding a measuring tape. The other carried a clipboard. They said they were there to evaluate the ramp. I asked them if they were licensed inspectors. They weren't. I asked them if they knew my son's condition. They didn't care. They made a few notes, took a few photos, and left without saying much. That afternoon, I got a fine notice. $300 due in 72 hours. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was personal. A few neighbors told me Linda had it out for non-conforming structures. She was the reason one guy had to repaint his mailbox 6 times in 2 months. She filed noise complaints against a kid practicing piano. She even tried to get a veteran's flagpole removed for being too tall. But this? Targeting a disabled child's access ramp? That was beyond cruel. So I did what Linda didn't expect. I got organized. First, I documented everything. Every letter, every photo, every timestamp. I took videos of Dylan using the ramp, showing how it improved his independence. I even pulled my city permit again and called the municipal building inspector to confirm, in writing, that it was 100% compliant. Then I started calling local reporters. At first, they brushed me off. One told me, "We don't usually cover HOA stuff unless it's dramatic." I said, "You want drama? A suburban HOA is threatening a disabled kid with daily fines for building a ramp that lets him enter his own home." That got their attention. The next day, a young reporter named Callie from the local ABC affiliate called me back. She asked for an interview. I said yes, and I made sure the ramp and Dylan were front and center. The news van pulled up on a Tuesday morning. It was surreal, watching a cameraman step out with a boom mic while Callie, the reporter, adjusted her blazer in my driveway like she was about to break the next Watergate. I had cleaned up the porch, brushed Dylan's hair, and coached myself all night to stay calm and focused. Callie was sharp. She let Dylan talk, let the camera capture him rolling smoothly down the ramp with the biggest grin. He told her he loved that he could go outside by myself now. Just a simple sentence. But I saw the cameraman flinch like it hit him in the chest. Then I handed Callie the HOA letters, the fines, the denial, and the permit. Her eyebrows lifted. You did everything right. Why are they saying it's not allowed? They said it hurts the neighborhood's visual integrity, I replied. But I think what really hurts this neighborhood is an HOA that punishes disabled children. Callie didn't say anything, just nodded like she already knew where the story was going. The segment aired that night at 6:15 p.m. sharp. By 6:30, my phone had 23 missed calls. Neighbors I barely knew were suddenly supportive. A woman down the street dropped off cookies and told me she had been bullied by the HOA into removing her backyard swing set because it wasn't approved. Someone else said Linda Wexler once threatened to tow his classic car from his own driveway because it looked too old. And then Linda responded, well, not to me. She called into the news station. I watched the follow-up interview with my jaw on the floor. The HOA has rules for a reason, she said in her syrupy sweet voice. We sympathize with the family's situation, of course, but allowing unapproved structures sets a dangerous precedent. Dangerous precedent? My son's wheelchair ramp? She added that the board had offered alternative accommodations, which was a total lie. They hadn't offered anything. That was the moment I realized Linda wasn't going to back down. She wasn't embarrassed. She was doubling down, so I did too. The next morning, I filed an ADA complaint. The Americans with Disabilities Act makes it very clear any governing body, including HOAs, cannot enforce aesthetic policies that prevent reasonable accessibility modifications. And I didn't stop there. I sent the news story to our city council rep. I posted it in every local Facebook group I could find, including a private one just for our neighborhood. That one exploded. Overnight, dozens of neighbors started sharing their own horror stories about the HOA board. Photos of warning letters, ridiculous fines, even video footage of Linda pacing around people's lawns with a measuring stick. Turns out I wasn't alone. Not even close. What really set it off, though, was a comment from a neighbor named Kevin. He posted, "The next board election is in 3 months. You only need 25% of homeowners to call for a special vote to replace them earlier. Anyone interested?" That's when things got real. By the end of the week, 67 homeowners had signed a petition demanding a special board vote. Linda, of course, tried to suppress it. She claimed the signatures weren't valid, that the petition wasn't formatted correctly, and that temporary media attention shouldn't sway the long-term governance. But people were done. Someone even found out Linda had a history of selectively approving architectural changes, like allowing her best friend to install a pergola without paperwork, while denying others for smaller changes. One neighbor said Linda personally approved her own solar panels after rejecting 3 other requests for the exact same model. A former board member chimed in too, anonymously, and said Linda manipulated meeting minutes and shut down dissent by overriding votes. Meanwhile, the news segment kept circulating. 2 weeks later, a second station picked it up. Then a national disability advocacy blog reposted it. Then a parent in another state emailed me, saying they were going through the same thing and thanked me for standing up to these people. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to protect my son. But now, this wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It was about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to live in. Linda didn't see it that way, of course. She kept fighting. She even called code enforcement and tried to argue that our ramp violated secondary setbacks. But the inspector had already been out. Everything was clean. We had the paperwork to prove it. And then, someone leaked the HOA's internal emails. I don't know who did it. Still don't. But one of them showed Linda writing this about me. If we make an exception for the wheelchair ramp, everyone will think they can just build whatever they want. We can't let one family make us look weak. That was it. That email was printed, laminated, and handed out at the community meeting where 94 people showed up, the largest turnout in our HOA's history, and every single one of them came ready to vote. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, slightly moldy building that usually hosted lukewarm coffee socials and the occasional water aerobics sign-up. But that night, it looked more like a courtroom. The folding chairs were packed. People stood along the walls, fanning themselves with HOA violation letters. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly trading stories, heads shaking and fingers pointing, not at each other, but at the people behind the long folding table in the front. The HOA board sat like royalty, Linda Wexler in the middle, jaw clenched, red lipstick smeared just enough to betray how rattled she was. To her right was Jerry, the treasurer, who once fined a family for having too many wind chimes. On her left was Denise, the secretary, who had made it her mission to ban all inflatable holiday decorations after one neighbor dared to display a Santa in July. These were not beloved people. When the meeting opened, Linda launched into a speech that sounded prepared, and probably was. She talked about preserving community standards, protecting property values, and resisting mob pressure from viral misinformation. She said the board had acted within the authority granted by our charter, and that removing a board mid-term was extreme and reactionary. Then she looked directly at me, front row, Dylan beside me in his chair, and said, "We sympathize with any hardship, but exceptions weaken the foundation of fair governance." That's when Kevin stood up. Kevin, the neighbor who started the petition, was a quiet guy, wore socks with sandals, drove a Prius that hadn't been washed since Obama's second term. But when he spoke, his voice carried, "You talk about fairness, Linda, but fairness doesn't mean punishing a disabled child for needing access to his home." The room clapped. He held up the laminated email, Linda's email, and read it out loud. "We can't let one family make us look weak." Dead silence, then murmurs, then gasps. Then Denise leaned over and whispered something in Linda's ear, but it was too late. The damage was done. Kevin continued. He reminded everyone that the board had bypassed due process, that they denied a legal, permitted ramp, that they refused to respond to multiple respectful requests, that they lied on television, that they broke ADA protections. He wasn't emotional, just precise. Then the vote began. We needed 75% of present homeowners to remove the board. When the ballots were passed out, I thought maybe it would be close. Maybe some people would still be scared of change. But when they started counting, you could feel the tide shift. One after another, after another. Final count, 91% in favor of removing the entire board. Gone, just like that. Linda stood up and tried to object, citing procedural discrepancies, but the HOA's own bylaws were clear. Special removal votes were binding if quorum was met, and we had more than double. Someone handed Linda a box and told her she could clear out her office by the end of the week. She didn't say a word, just gathered her clipboard and stormed out the back door, her heels echoing down the tile like a retreating general. The room erupted, people hugged, someone brought cookies. Dylan, who had sat quietly through most of it, looked up at me and whispered, "Did we win?" I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But we weren't done yet. The new board was sworn in that night, interim volunteers until a full election could be held. Kevin became president. I joined the Architectural Review Committee. Another neighbor, Maria, who was a disability rights attorney, took over as compliance lead. One of our first actions? We repealed the aesthetic ban on accessibility modifications. Next, we voided every fine Linda had issued in the last 3 months. And finally, we voted to audit the HOA's finances. Turns out, Linda had been waiving fines for her inner circle while jacking G-up dues for everyone else. There were invoices for landscaping services that had never been performed. A $200 consulting fee paid to her cousin, who lived 2 states away. And don't even get me started on the $800 holiday party that somehow resulted in 2 trays of meatballs and a broken karaoke machine. We compiled the report and forwarded it to the city's HOA regulatory office. But what I didn't expect was the media firestorm that followed. Apparently, our story had struck a nerve nationwide. Parents from other communities started reaching out. One woman from Texas emailed me a photo of her son's ramp with a citation taped to it, almost identical to ours. The blog post Callie had written? It was now on the home page of a national disability rights organization. And Dylan? He started getting letters. Actual letters. From kids in wheelchairs. From teachers. From total strangers. One of them said, "Your ramp showed me that I deserve to take up space too. It took everything in me not to cry when I read that one aloud. But I wasn't finished. The HOA drama was settled, but I knew the real change would come from what happened next. Because when the dust finally cleared, I had an idea, a big one. 3 months after the board was removed, life settled into something close to normal. The fines were gone. Dylan used his ramp every day without fear, and I finally slept without scanning my inbox for another notice taped to my front door like a threat. But something had changed in me. This whole fight, it lit a fire I hadn't expected. See, when that news story went viral, something strange started happening. People didn't just thank me. They started asking for help. A couple from Michigan emailed about their HOA refusing to approve a chairlift. A woman in Arizona said she was told her son's therapy swing was a liability hazard. A military vet in Georgia had his home modified through the VA, only to be fined $200 a day because the ramp didn't match the neighborhood color palette. And each time, I thought, how many people have fought this battle alone? I couldn't let it go. So I built a website, nothing fancy, just a homepage with a mission. Accessibility is not optional. If your HOA is punishing you for mobility modifications, we'll help you fight back. I called it ramprights.org. At first it was just a few resources. ADA links, downloadable template letters, links to city building departments. But then I started adding contact forms, and stories, and news articles. And within weeks I had dozens of submissions. I reached back out to Callie from the local news station and told her what I was doing. She pitched it to her national affiliate. They loved it. Soon, we were on Good Morning America. They showed a photo of Dylan coming down the ramp with a cookie in one hand and a dinosaur in the other. I still cry when I think about it, but let's rewind. Because the real twist, the part that truly made it all worth it, came one quiet afternoon in April, when I received a very official-looking letter in the mail. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a subpoena. Apparently, the HOA's former president, Linda Wexler, was now under investigation for misappropriation of funds, fraud, and abuse of power. The city had opened a formal case based on the audit our new board submitted, and they wanted me to provide testimony. You better believe I showed up. I wore a blazer and printed every email, every photo, every threat letter Linda had ever sent me. I answered every question with clarity, calm, confidence. I wasn't barred anymore. I had already won where it mattered. By the time the investigation wrapped up, Linda had been fined by the city and barred from serving on any neighborhood governance board for 5 years. She also had to reimburse the HOA nearly $9,000 in misused funds. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a party. I just closed the file and focused on the work ahead, because that was the real victory. Months passed. Ramp rights grew. We partnered with a legal nonprofit to offer free consultations. A civil engineer volunteered to draw up ADA-compliant ramp plans. By the end of the year, we'd helped 93 families keep their mobility modifications without penalty. Dylan even got to speak at a local school board about accessibility. He was nervous at first, but then he looked out at the crowd and said something I'll never forget. People like me just want to live in homes like everyone else. We don't need special treatment. We just need ramps. You could have heard a pin drop. The whole room stood up and clapped. And here's the full circle moment. One day, while dropping Dylan off at school, a woman in a navy sweater approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. "I'm sorry," she said. "I just wanted to thank you. My mom lives across town and her HOA just approved her ramp without a single complaint. They said they didn't want a situation like the Dylan case." I smiled. It had a name now. The Dylan case. What started as a cold letter taped to a handrail became a local news story, then a movement, then a warning to every HOA board across the country. Think twice before you punish people for needing access, because they just might fight back. and win.